Welcome. Welcome, everybody. Welcome at the Joep Lange Symposium.
Can we please shut the... Yes, thank you.
I'm only here to welcome you on behalf of the Amsterdam Institute for Global Health and Development and the Joep Lange Institute. We will have a full room later on. We know this from experience. People will dribble in. So we look forward to a very nice discussion because we have 4 very distinguished and exciting speakers. I'm only here to welcome you and all of you online watching the stream, because we're not only us, it's also people watching the live stream online. Welcome to those as well. And I'm not moderating today. Anniek de Ruijter is moderating, and I hand over to her, and I will, with you, hopefully enjoy the session today.
Yes, thank you very much, Constance. And so my name is Anniek de Ruijter. I'm also a research fellow at Amsterdam Institute for Global Health and Development, and I'm also the chair of our academic council. And I also represent the law faculty in our wonderful institute. And actually today there was a defense of Pramiti Parwani, and I think many of you also know her. It was a very festive occasion. She got cum laude degree. And I think that this is just one of the examples of what AIGHD can do. Very relevant research, but also very interdisciplinary. And I think some of the outcomes of that research will also help us in the discussion we're having today. So, of course, this is the Joep Lange Symposium, and just saying that and having saying that name also reminds us a little bit of the past, and that's also the theme for today. So, what was the past in global health? Also, where a little bit of stock taking. Where are we now, and how can we take some of those learnings from the past into the future? And even into a future that we might not completely be able to foresee what will happen, right? So how can we also be resilient in view of that? Now, of course, as is the case with the AIGHD, everybody knows what I mean with that short? Yes. Today is also an interdisciplinary event where we really try to look at the future of global health from a number of different perspectives. Of course, I'm also very proud that we have a lawyer on the program because we're a little bit more new in this field. So I'm very much looking forward to that for later. But the organizing committee of our day for today has framed our conversation for today into 3 interconnected dimensions: systems, so talking about governance, regulation, and also financing; societies, so ethics, equity, culture, I would say, citizens and agency; and solutions, technologies, and scientific breakthroughs. So I think it's important to also carve out all of these different dimensions in our discussions, and do jump in if you feel like we're missing out on some of these important elements in our discussion today. I think the outcome of this meeting today will also be going into the future of the conversations around what is AIGHD to be and where do we want to focus on. So I also think it's important that we think about it that way. Also, the center itself is going through some important changes. Those changes also come in a time where global health is going through quite some changes. So let's also make sure we think very concretely. So, okay, what do we stop doing and what do we start doing now? So with that, I would like to invite, hold on, I'm first going to introduce her. Brooke Nichols, who is a fellow with us. She's also an infectious disease mathematical modeler and a health economist at the Boston University School of Public Health. Many of you know her also from the impact counter, of course. It's really made waves in our thinking about what's happening right now, making it very visible and quantifiable in a very confronting way of the time that we now live through. She studied transmission dynamics. See, I'm now going to say a lot of words that I might like not know exactly what it means. I'm just gonna pretend like I know all what I'm talking about. Lawyers are super good at doing this. We do this all the time. Implementing modeling, cost-effective resource allocation for major infectious diseases. And her work really informs national and global health policy, integrating epidemiological and economic evidence to optimize scalable interventions. I would very much like to invite her and give her an applause.
Thank you, guys. So we're going to do a bit of a history first about where we've been, where we are today, and why, and kind of what are potential paths forward, given all that we know. So 30 years ago, HIV/AIDS was the biggest global health crisis. And today, it's something that we don't often think about, because actually, we've tackled HIV remarkably well, and where we are today is kind of unfathomable to what it might have looked like in the late 80s, early 90s. So I took a picture of this poster in Constance's office about an HIV conference in 1994, it's 31 years ago, talking about, what's the future going to look like and the future of HIV and AIDS. And today we're looking back to the future and sort of thinking about both of these together. So where were we 31 years ago? Where are we today? And what can we learn from kind of where we were back then as well? So what did the world look like in 1994? I was small, so I don't remember too well, but some of you might remember very well what the world looked like in 1994, and some of you might have just read about it. But for the global HIV response and what was happening, there was no treatment that really worked. We had monotherapy and dual therapy, so HIV treatment that kind of worked, but you got resistance pretty quickly and people are still dying. Those drugs weren't available to everyone. People were dying everywhere. I was born in 1987 in New York City, and the hospital that I was born in, 70% of the beds at that time were filled with AIDS patients. So just like, it wasn't that long ago. And that was not just New York City, that was many places all over the world. And at that time, there was a ton of activism that was happening. People really digging in, pushing, we want to do something about this. We don't just want to die, we don't want to watch people die. We want something to happen. And so a lot of sort of what happened in the 90s and still like the whole advocacy movement, the HIV advocates, so strong. And a lot of the reason why the response looked like it does today. But then a couple years later, 1996, all of a sudden we had triple therapy for HIV treatment. So this means that drugs that worked, drugs that were actually going to treat people and make sure that they didn't die, people could live long, healthy lives. And so this was a huge turning point, but you had to take a ton of pills. Either there was two kinds of regimens available back then. One was 12 pills twice a day. Imagine swallowing 12 pills in one go. It's a lot. There was also another regimen, which was one pill 3 times a day and another pill 2 times a day, but all different times. Imagine keeping track. Like, I can barely take 1 pill a day. I am a bad patient, okay? Let alone trying to do this. But it worked. It keeps people alive. And what an amazing revolution that was at the time. Guess how much it cost? $1 gajillion, because of course it did. Because of course, only if you have money should you be able to live a long and healthy life. Anyway. So who got the drugs? In 1996, 1997, who was getting the drugs? Where were the people who were getting drugs? Where in the world? Anyone? Yeah, here, kinda. US, kinda. 30 million people in 1997 were infected with HIV, of which almost 21 million of which were in sub-Saharan Africa. Drugs were not going there. And in 1997, 2 of my mom's best friends died of AIDS in New York City. So these drugs theoretically were available, but they were not equitably available. They were not affordable. And sort of the gains we have come from this. Oof. So first, a little bit about numbers, because I'm a numbers person. To give you a sense of the numbers of what the toll of all of this looked like, in that time period, post-1996, this was life expectancy in South Africa, which went from 63 down to as low as 52. I think several people in this audience are 52 or older. Like, that is unfathomable. That was a life expectancy, all from a single pathogen. Also, the amount of new infections, everything was at an all-time high. There was no treatment. There was no... What did we have? We had, like, abstinence equals freedom. That was the only kind of... I mean, there were solutions, but we didn't have much. And the worst part about all... well, one of the worst parts is the age at which people are dying. So this is mortality by several different countries. The bottom two lines, US and the Netherlands. This is mortality between the ages of 15 and 50. So people are dying in the primes of their lives at increasing rates in many different countries, mostly in East and Southern Africa. Still no drugs. Still no drugs. But what does it look like? These are people. These are people who are dying. Tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people. And schools were shut down. Or sometimes schools only ran 3 days a week, 4 days a week max, because teachers were going to funerals every week. That's what it looked like. Where hospitals were so completely overwhelmed they couldn't treat anything else. Because how could you? How could you? And since this is the Joep Lange Symposium, he said, if we can get Coca-Cola and beer to every remote corner of Africa, it should not be impossible to do the same with drugs. And so Joep and many in this audience and people from Farm Access and people from found ways to get drugs to people because people are mad. Like, people should have access to this. This is killing people. And so as sort of that momentum, the idea that equity and that people should have access really drove these initial forays into getting drugs into Africa. So we were able to show that through this, like even through the Heineken program, workplace programs, we could save. It's actually really beneficial for workplaces to offer antiretroviral treatment because their workforce didn't die, because people weren't going to funerals, because people could stay healthy. What a revolution. Like, yes, of course we should have that, right? And at the same time, during this period, there's also a ton of activism, so not just in Europe, not just in Asia, not just, also in Africa, tons of activism. We want these drugs, we need these drugs, we deserve to live. So in 2002, there were 29 million people living with HIV in sub-Saharan Africa. Guess how many were on treatment? Someone guess. 100,000. That much. That's it. 100,000 of 29 million people. Granted, we used to sort of say whether or not someone could get treatment based on their CD4 cell count back then, but the total need was probably on the order of 15 to 20 million, not 100,000. So in 2003, there was a complete game changer for access. And George Bush, who now seems like a delight of a president, he did something amazing, actually amazing. He started PEPFAR, which is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. And this was a $15 billion commitment over the course of, initially for 5 years to start, where they were going to provide that money to 14 countries, 12 of which were in sub-Saharan Africa, also Haiti, Guyana, and then later Vietnam was added. And this really this revolutionized access, because all of a sudden we were going to go from 100,000 to 10 million in the course of a few years. And of course, PEPFAR wasn't the only donor. Global Fund was started also in the early 2000s, which also provided HIV support. Great funding, great. But much less, and also partly funded by the United States. So, how? How do we get $15 billion into countries that need it, set up programs to really tackle HIV as a public health problem, as a public health threat, as the emergency that it really was? So, I make terrible figures in PowerPoint, but here, we have sort of the current healthcare expenditure of a government and the money that they're currently spending on their healthcare. This might be how much money a government needs to actually provide healthcare that it wants for the requirements of its population. And typically there's been this huge unmet health need. And so PEPFAR comes in and says, okay, we're gonna give money But we're going to silo it. We're going to say it's just for HIV. We're going to provide drugs. We're going to provide tests. We're going to create the infrastructure that we need to make sure these programs are successful. We're going to report back to the United States. We're not going to report back to country governments. But we're going to set up this great program. And we're going to do it fast. And we're going to pour money into it and fix this problem. There's still a ton of unmet health need. That has nothing to do with HIV, just general health need. And some of these siloed vertical programs didn't do a great job sort of bleeding into other spaces, not what people initially might thought it would look like. So, but vertical programs, to their credit, are catalysts for this rapid growth and ultimately success in this one area, definitely in the HIV space. And a lot of how that was done, so South Africa is sort of a big exception, there's some others, but we went from a primary care clinic to a primary care clinic and then an ART clinic for treatment. And they were separate because that was easier. It was easier to build a new clinic. It was easier to be accountable. It was easier to pour money into it, hire new staff at the new clinic. But the primary care clinic still had a lot of infrastructure issues. Even in a lot of places today, if you go, a lot of different countries, there'll be regular stockouts of paracetamol, stockouts of antibiotics in the primary care clinic, stockout of lots of things. There's no lab testing offered at these clinics necessarily. You have to refer the person, not a specimen. Often underfunded, not enough staff. And they might have government tracking of outcomes and often on paper. But these ART clinics, in comparison, gorgeous. I mean, they're rarely stockouts. They do happen, but they're rare. If you open the cabinet, it's full of ART, amazing. You can actually get a lab test, you can get a viral load test, get it sent anywhere, all funded by the US taxpayers. Well-funded extra staff that were paid for by these programs. But they had this parallel tracking system that the governments didn't own or couldn't keep track of or couldn't access themselves, all reporting back to how things are going back to the US government. Fine. But there's also other game-changing advances at the same time. So we had this vertical program, lots of money being poured in. We also had once daily regimens. Instead of taking those 24 pills in a day or the 5 pills at 5 different times, 1 pill once a day. Amazing. That can really change things for a lot of people. And we also, this concept of undetectable as untransmissible was also huge because we can test people, treat them immediately, and that has a huge effect on the epidemic. And we also know that. But these biomedical advances were also driven by people, by activists, by communities, by people living with HIV. And so these new biomedical advances, even PEPFAR itself, a lot of this was driven by people, by us, by our push. And between all of these things, we had massive success. So this was that mortality before. All of a sudden, people in the primes of their lives weren't dying at these really high rates anymore. The programs were really working. This deaths due to HIV dropped dramatically. But perhaps as you can see where I'm setting us up here, that there are some problems with vertical programs. Because what happens when you take the money away, and the money was paying for that clinic, well, what happens? Where do those people go? Everyone goes back to the original primary care clinic. We all hope for quick integration. The idea of integration's old. We've been talking about it for a long time, but haven't had the urgency to integrate programs. And then what happens in 2025? I have mostly swear words to say when I look at this and see what happened. When I saw that the US government was going to freeze foreign aid, I thought there's no way they could stop PEPFAR, because that would kill people. Because of course it would. It's completely outrageous. But that happened. And so because of that, I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, but this is why I started that impact counter that Anniek had mentioned as well, because I knew how many people were going to die. And I would we got to show that to people. Because someone has to care. Because we can't just stop these programs. We can't just go back to where we were. We can't have people filling hospitals. We can't do that, can we? So I thought, surely if we can show people how many people are dying and will die because of the stopping of this program, because of how this is going, someone will do something, right? Kinda. It's been a little quieter than I would have hoped, right? But still, a lot of this work was able to it was discussed in Congress, for better or for worse. It got a lot of press and even in the Netherlands. And there's still ongoing discussions and questions about funding, but ultimately, why were people going to die because we're stopping these programs? I think it's important to understand that. So it's partly because of that vertical system vulnerability, and that if you take out the donor and they were funding a whole program on its own and it wasn't integrated into the country's healthcare system, that was going to be a vulnerability. Also, that reliance on a single donor is dangerous. We thought we were covered because it was CDC, it was USAID, it was PEPFAR, it was Global Fund. All of that money comes from the US government. So it seems like we had this diverse pool of resources, kind of, but we all kind of knew that wasn't true. But that was dangerous. And all of this, and the fact that people, and the reason behind people dying because of these cuts, is that it was an overnight decision. Because countries could have made plans if they said, okay, in 2030, we're going to have no more funding for this. And then we would have had a chance to make a plan and people would not have died. Because this happened one day to the next, you topple the whole system. Where do we go? So the buzzword of the moment is integration. Again, this is, if we look back to the future, this is something we had been talking about for a long time and is now more important than ever. But there are systems like this. This represents a specimen transport network where you have your HIV specimens being funded by one donor, your tuberculosis samples being sent by someone else, and another program setting up, and you had a ton of overlap and mismatch and chaos in some of these systems. And now there's an opportunity, if country governments get to own and lead their own program, you can all of a sudden increase access to a lot of different testing if you're running it from one system, actually start to achieve the UHC goals. And so there's some benefits that could come from integration and go from these two clinics back to the fact now just having one clinic. Like, there are efficiencies to be gained from integration. You can actually reduce your total health system cost, which is great. You can actually start to achieve this country-led health prioritization, not just US government saying, this is what we're doing. Countries can then own the programs, decide where the funding is going. Reduce stigma for HIV. Instead of having these standalone clinics, integrating HIV care into everyday care. This move towards UHC, and maybe improving total health outcomes. But there's also a massive risk to integration. One, it's going to be happening too fast. And that can create issues, because if it's forced overnight and it just needs to be done quickly, doesn't mean it's going to be done right. And graphs. All this shows is that if you integrate, let's say, and you want to increase your hypertension program, and we are now at 7% of hypertension control in sub-Saharan Africa of people with hypertension. It's very low. If we were able to get that to 60%, that would do a lot of good. But if it comes at the detriment of the HIV program, even just a little, we can backslide tremendously in our progress against HIV. And so we may have to really protect the gains that we've made in HIV because of the fact that this is this ongoing, it's an infectious disease, and every infection will need to be treated lifelong. So, far less sexy, but equally, or more important, is health finance. Something I don't know a lot about, but I think this is really how we're going to have to rethink and reimagine how we fund these types of programs. So we need to go from these vertical systems. And a lot of the discussion at the State Department and PEPFAR right now is, okay, this doesn't work and it's risky. So how do we put the PEPFAR money into the domestic, into countries, and then have countries develop their programs with that funding? So the programs are fully country-owned and country-led. And that's where they're moving, which is actually great and should have been done long ago. So maybe your overall health budget, maybe the total health budget need reduces because we're going to create some efficiency with our integration, great. You're going to have perhaps some increased domestic spending, if possible. Not all countries can do that. And donor support through the countries. Any donor support that does come in, having it go through the country. And then also looking back to things like the workplace programs have a role to play, and how do we fill this unmet health need? And it could also be the private sector, public-private partnerships, things like these workplace healthcare programs that should be, workplaces should be willing to offer. can also create inequities and gaps in who accesses care, so we have to make sure our public programs are solid. And there might always still be unmet health need. But ultimately, how we look at finance will be important and will really change our overall sort of approach to the HIV epidemic as well. So right now, we're at this inflection point. So this is work from Joep Lange in Zambia, showing the pink line is we stop funding all this stuff right now. And that's the HIV-related deaths, and you just see it going off the chart. So pink line, we do nothing. Green line is we get it back on track in 4 years, and the other lines are we get it back on track sooner. Holy, that is so astounding. Because what we do now is going to have an impact over the next 20, 30, 40 years. And it will completely change the course of what HIV looks like, of what the response looks like, of how much this is going to cost us in the long term. So a lot of these vertical successes are what got us here, but ultimately, systemic sustainability is going to determine whether or not we get to stay here and sort of stay on this, this trend of reducing deaths and reducing incidence and making sure the HIV epidemic stays under control. So ultimately, our collective choices and actions now are going to decide whether or not we let decades of progress slip away. And I think all of us have a role to play. If you look at the value of advocates, of people saying this is a problem and speaking up has massive effect. And so we can have our roles to play in our work lives, but also our private lives. So I would urge all of you, if you don't want to slip back and you want to keep advocating, I suggest now is the time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Brooke. I'm just stepping in for Anniek, who has had an urgent meeting now. Thanks a lot. Food for thought. Are there any clarifying questions? Because we will have a discussion afterwards at the end of the session, the whole symposium. Are there any burning clarifying questions? Yeah.
So thank you for the presentation. The numbers that you presented on the increase in death, is that a scientific calculation, a modeling thing, or is it based on real studies coming from, the census in countries?
Yeah, so those were the mortality. The expected mortality is all modeling predictions, but based on calibrated to real data. So they do know if we take the pressure off, what would happen based on what we know now. Yep.
So, and I just wanted to give a comment on being a prevention consultant for the Global Fund, because you were saying a lot of the money is going, US money is going through the Global Fund. That's true, but just to say that Global Fund for the current grant cycle did get most of the money from Global Fund, and there's only, with the reprioritization now, like a 10 to 15% cut in most countries, which is still not great, yep, but less than was expected. And then maybe another more comment is we don't even see this was all treatment related. If you look at prevention, that's hard hit, and especially even with PEPFAR kind of coming back a little bit, prevention is kind of not on the radar, definitely not for the key populations who don't even use that clinic, but have other services that kind of are completely now, and even at the Global Fund, we need to change kind of our language because we still support those programs, but that's even not on the radar anymore. So,
and those prevention programs,
lifesavers.
Yeah, right. And because a lot of the prevention services offered through through standard clinics are not where they need to be to reach the people that need those services. So even if we had prevention, if we don't have those special services, we're not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, so a little bit more food for thought.
Yeah, that's great. And keep other thoughts and suggestions because we will have a discussion also too. So great, thank you very much, Brooke. Great work. Before I introduce the next speaker, where is the next speaker? There is the next speaker. I just wanted to say that if you that we would be happy if you would like to agree with pictures that we're taking, but if you don't agree with these pictures and particularly showing them maybe on the website or something, please let us know because of course then we will not show them. Yep. So that was housekeeping. Any more housekeeping left? No? Okay. So now for something completely different, we go to our next speaker who came all the way from Uganda for us, and Martha Isabella Achan. Over here. And Martha is going to talk about the cuts in resources, of course, also on the legal reforms, particularly for the situation in Uganda. Martha is a lawyer, has a degree from Makerere University and from Leicester University, and is also a Master of Public Health in International Public Health. She serves as a legal advisor to the Uganda's National Action Plan for Health Security, and focuses on reforming public health and animal health and animal disease and food safety legislation. Interestingly, she also represents the Uganda Ministry of Health in the WHO negotiations on amendment to the international health regulations and contributes to the drafting of the pandemic treaty. So very excited that you are here, Martha, and please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Constance, for that beautiful presentation. I know many people might want to hear about the pandemic treaty, but I will not talk about it today. It's a bit controversial. I'd like to start with that quotation that the former speaker talked about. If we can get cold Coca-Cola and beer to every remote corner of Africa, it should be impossible. It should not be impossible to do the same for drugs. And I believe this is what the approach was for the partners that the government of Uganda was working with to carry out legal reform processes in Uganda. So today I want to talk about that specifically, and it's my area of interest and passion. I reform laws for my country, Uganda. So as a way of background, I joined the Ministry of Health in 2019 as a commercial lawyer, and I was hired to do legal reforms. That's my area of experience. My focus at the time was to review a law that was over 8 years old, the Public Health Act. And once we began the process, we had the outbreak of COVID-19. So I had to pause that process and support my country. Why did I do this? At the time, the minister chose to close the borders of the country. And I told her, you can't do that because that's a legal process. And she told me, I can do what I want. I'm trying to save lives. And the lawyer, a very controversial lawyer, served the Attorney General with a notice of intention to sue, to stop the process. That's when the minister and her colleagues who were responding to COVID-19 at the time in 2020 discovered the relevancy of laws in outbreak response in Uganda. And that's when my journey began in public health. Right now, I've not looked back 6 years. I'm no longer a commercial lawyer. I'm now specializing in public health. And I'll start from there. In this title, when you look at the title in front of you, we talk about resource cuts. This is not just funding, but also technical support. We do not have lawyers focused on public health in Uganda. Probably we are a handful, about 4 of us. So when we talk about resource cuts, it's not just about bringing funding into the country, but also teaching and interesting lawyers in public health. And this is what the kind of help we're getting from the US government and other development partners. So in 2017, we carried out what we call a joint external evaluation. For those who don't know about this, it usually is meant to assess how a country can prevent, detect, and respond to outbreaks. Uganda has so far done 2 of them, one in 2017, another one in 2023. This particular country has only done 1, and it was this year, 2025. So in 2017, Uganda was guided to review 4 sets of laws: the Public Health Act, the Animal Diseases Act, and the Food Safety Laws. And like I said earlier on, the Public Health Act was carried out and concluded. I'll explain why much later. Right now, the Animal Diseases Act is still progressing, And this particular year, we began on the food safety laws. We had support for the Public Health Act from the US government through the CDC and USAID, as well as our development partner called Resolve to Save Lives. They came with technical support and funding. And indeed, successfully, in 2023, we were able to amend the Public Health Act. It was a very long process, and I'll explain it later on. Right now, the Animal Disease Act is pending. It's in the form of a bill, and I think it will be concluded very soon. The support for the Animal Disease Act comes through the EU and some development partners. Now, for the Public Health Act, it is done under the Ministry of Health. But for the Animal Disease Act, as you may be already imagine, it's under the ministry responsible for animal health. In 2023, we were able to carry out another joint external evaluation, and we scored 3 as for the legislation. So this particular evaluation is done to cover different sectors, but for legislation, we scored 3. And this was because we were penalized that we were not able to amend the Animal Disease Act, but also experts in the room at the time also mentioned the fact that we were supposed to have worked out a reform of the biosafety and biosecurity law of the country. That is still pending. I tried to do a comparison with other countries, and because of the work I'm doing with Resolve to Save Lives, a partner of the government of Uganda, similar work is going on also in Nigeria, Ethiopia, the DRC, and these particular reforms have been strongly affected by the ongoing resource cuts, because we are all supported by the US government as well as Resolve to Save Lives, which is also a development partner involved in public health legal reforms. For Nigeria, they have reached out to other international organizations like the World Bank, and they probably will continue their work as well as DRC. For Uganda, not yet. We still have a gap there. And another development that has come along the way is that interest is now shifting from preventing epidemics when it comes to funding to cardiovascular health. And much as Uganda is facing a double burden of NCDs, non-communicable diseases, as well as communicable diseases, for us as a country, for example, this year we've already had to respond to 3 different outbreaks of Sudan Ebola. So much as we accept that we have a challenge of the NCDs, the more urgent need is to prevent epidemics from spreading beyond our borders. So due to these changes, already we have work on preventing epidemics in terms of legal reform stalling. That was decided to stall, as I'll explain later on. So like I explained later on, the Public Health Act as a major reform was amended, but one of the reasons why it was really amended very fast was because we did the process during the COVID-19 pandemic. So the parliamentarians picked interest in progressing this particular law. So we can't really say that the success was due to probably the interest of the country, but it was because of the pandemic that was happening at the same time. However, right now we have a challenge because there are particular laws under the Public Health Act, like the Public Health Notifiable Disease Rules and the Order, as well as the laws to do with carrying out health measures at the points of entry. These 2 laws are stalled right now because of the resource cuts, and we're still looking for ways of progressing them. Unfortunately, the Public Health Notifiable Disease Rules is very critical for outbreak response. It's the law we use to carry out detection, reporting and responding to outbreaks. It's the law we use to list all the notifiable diseases in the country, including COVID, Ebola, Marburg, Mpox, and all these. It's the same law we use to put in place ways in which we can have reports from the village health teams through the clinics up to the Ministry of Health. It's the same law we use to come up with barrier arrangements and procedures for Ebola patients. So that particular law is still stalling right now because of the resource cuts. Another important law is a lot to do with implementing health measures at the points of entry. This particular law is important because sometimes we have outbreaks across the border, like in the DRC. This is a law we're supposed to use to carry out health measures like screening at the points of entry. It has also now stalled because of resource cuts. The same applies to the Animal Diseases Act. It's in advanced stages right now in the form of Animal Diseases Health Bill. It was supposed to go back to the cabinet for further discussion. It has also stalled because the funding from the EU expired last year. We thought we'd get support this year, but with the recent cuts, that is also going to stall. I mentioned this particular one because it relates to the recommendations I mentioned earlier. That is the Agricultural Food Safety Health Bill. It's also in advanced stages, but it can't progress at the moment as well. It's also stuck. Now, these particular laws are very important, and they cut across not just the Ministry of Health, but also the ministry responsible for animal health and other sectors. So currently, we are doing a review of laws to do with sanitation, water sanitation and hygiene. That is WASH. And as a Ministry of Health, because we've realized the funding has been reduced from the US government, we have now reached out to other agencies. And we have a commitment from the UNICEF to support us this particular legal reform. Sadly for us, we thought we would actually be one of the first countries to have a national policy on One Health. We began this work 2 years ago. We had support from the Resolve to Save Lives. That too has stalled and has stopped. We also had some work going on that had commenced for biosafety and biosecurity, as well as infection prevention and control. All this work has stalled, considering the ongoing changes and resource cuts. Now, of course, you might be wondering, what would Uganda have done if they didn't have this support from outside? And I'll explain later. So what are the other options that we could think about? Now, when you think about it, these legal reforms are actually done by the government of Uganda, which means we can't be waiting for external support from other governments. The problem with the mainstream budgeting is that the processes are lengthy, and you can't have as many meetings as you would want to have, because for you to have a successful legal reform process, you need to consult as many people as possible, and those who are affected. So we have the problem when it comes to the health sector of competing priorities. A legal reform process will start, but then you have an outbreak. I gave an example. Just within this year, we have had 3 outbreaks of Sudan Ebola. I've not mentioned Mpox or Marburg. Mpox is going on right now. So that means that there are competing priorities on where to put the funding. Another ongoing priority at the moment are the elections, political campaigns. That also affects legal reform processes. So ideally, government is the best option for these reforms to happen, but it depends, it will take a longer period of time. I speak from experience because I've been doing this for about 18 years, so I know when you have external support, if you present a very good proposal to stakeholders, to development partners, you're able to move along in about 3 years. When it comes to government, you move it through a period of even up to 10 years, especially because of the competing priorities. The other option would be to partner with different ministries, departments, and agencies to ease the financial burden. We have done that currently because there's a particular institution called the Uganda Law Reform Commission, and its main focus is to support government current legal reforms. Currently, they're doing an overhaul of all the laws in Uganda, so we have reached out to them to support us at least with those which are actually concluded, to help us with the publication. If you look at this particular 2 laws, the one to do with notifiable diseases and the ones to do the points of entry, we've reached out to this particular commission to support us to publish them. Likely, probably by the end of the year, we shall have them already in the statute books. The other options that we are thinking about right now is the Africa CDC. I don't know if anyone knows about this particular one. So they have come up with model laws on infection prevention and control, as well as model laws on biosafety and biosecurity. And these model laws are supposed to guide countries in Africa on how to come up with specific laws. The only disadvantage about this particular option is that they will come up with model laws and provisions which we have to implement as countries, yet we might have different aspirations and interests as countries. So that's the only hiccup there. And then what you may have seen in the social media is true. The US government has come back with some bilateral agreements whereby if they are to support us to probably respond and handle malaria, HIV, and TB, there's an exchange. So within the last 1 week, different countries have been approached with this bilateral agreement. So going around, it's really public news, at least on the continent. So that is the other option which has come up. There's a hiccup there as well. We are still negotiating the terms because the exchange is data, access to our data. And like I was introduced earlier on, I'm negotiating a similar agreement in Geneva right now. So there's a bit of a headache between how to take on that particular option as a country. And the advantage is that the US government comes with the funding and as well as technical support because they are really advanced in public health. The disadvantage is that as they are supporting us financially, it means they also have to release some, information. But we are still negotiating the terms, so I can't discuss that really in detail. So that's all I had from my side. Thank you very much.
For a little bit, yes. So thank you very much. In your talk, you speak a lot about the impact of the lack of funding on moving some of these legislative agendas forward. Where exactly is the impact of the lack of funding? Is it at the level of lawmaking, or is it more that it stalls because it's foreseen that the implementation will become a problem, or the capacity on the ground to implement these laws?
Yeah, so where it stalls is there's a process in Uganda on how you come up with laws. The most important part of that process is the consultations. So you need to meet the main stakeholders. For example, if I'm coming up with a law on animal health, I have to meet the farmers, I have to meet the traders in cattle. But these meetings require you to put people in a room like this one and facilitate them for a period of 3 to 4 days. And that requires funding. These meetings, we need somebody who's an expert in that area to come into the room and talk to people. That's also funding. So it's not the enforcement that where there's a problem, it's actually the consultation stage.
So it's the organization of the legislative process,
Yes,
basically.
Yes.
And is there also, is this regardless of political will, or do you also see in some of these legislative agenda that some of these, there's lots of political will and on others there's less? I mean, does that also come into discussions about which legislative trains you're halting and which ones you're trying to push?
So there's no way you can separate laws from politics. There's no way. So, like I said, for the Public Health Act, we reformed that law in 3 years. That is unprecedented. Laws take about 7 years to 10 years. Why did we do that? Because of the COVID-19 pandemic in the country, the politicians got interested in the public health law. It progressed to conclusion. Now, the Animal Diseases Act has delayed because there are many farmers in Parliament. There are many farmers in cabinet, the cabinet of ministers. So everyone wants to put something there, and everyone wants to be sure what is there is what will work for their farms. So it's very hard when you're doing a legal reform process to separate the laws from politics. Yes.
I also want to open the floor to questions, so start thinking about it. But I also have a question around implementation. It's one thing to come up with a wonderful law, but to what extent is it, what is the context at which if some of these legal changes come through, what are how easy is it to get a law to actually be implemented on the ground and sort of change the social structures on the ground in the way that people start reporting on certain diseases or start to change their agriculture? What are the difficulties there in terms of getting legislation on the ground?
So Uganda is known for having some of the most beautiful laws, and I know for a fact that many countries around Uganda will pick those laws and use them in their own countries. In the negotiations in Geneva, one of the countries in the southern part of Africa told us that they picked the access and benefit sharing law from Uganda and changed that the part Uganda and just used as it was. So my country has beautiful laws, but of course the enforcement is hard. It's very difficult. It may not be the case for the public health laws, like there's a particular law I kept referring to, the law that to do with notifiable diseases. That one, inevitably, it has to be implemented because it covers prevention, detection, responding, burials, surveillance, screening. Those ones really are implementable and they are used. But many laws in my country are beautiful. Enforcement is very difficult and very and tough, yes.
Yes. So I would like to see if someone also has a question for Martha. And I have another microphone I can use. Oh, you do. Leah. Oh, I had a question over here. Oh, there. And then we go to you. My pen, yeah, of course. Yes. Yes.
Webalinho. Webalinho. Very intriguing, and Uganda has always been, of course, the example country in many ways. You talk a lot about the cuts, and we all know about that. But can you quantify that a little bit, like in your sector, what the cuts are really like in percentages, and what are the priorities now? What are the focuses where you can continue instead of, sort of falling dead? But what should be continuing now, and because in the next 3 years there will be problems financially. As you say, the government is not able to pick it, and Africa CDC is also not responding that fast. But what will be the continuation in the next 3 years?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Now, when we're looking at the implementation of international health regulations, there are what they call core capacities. There's AMARA, there's vaccination, there is surveillance, there is legislation. Now, of all the development partners that partner with the Ministry of Health, only one is interested in legal reforms. There are so many. Only one. Now, if you say you want to quantify and what happens next, for example, the Public Health Act had not been reviewed in 85 years plus, by the time I worked on it. The Animal Disease Act is very old. They only reviewed the issues to do with funding, okay? So in terms of, by the way, the amounts of money needed to carry out a legal reform is not very high. An average meeting of a consultation costs about $8,000, $10,000 US. Those are 40 participants in the room. Publishing a law takes about $1,000. You see that? The problem is that it takes a long time. The consultations take a long time. So many people don't want to commit to this. And then also, it's really a government function. It's not really, it's something that has to be initiated by government. You see, ideas are supposed to be done by government. But Ministry of Health has aspirations of what laws they want to change. The ministry responsible for animal health has aspirations of what laws they want to change. They don't have that kind of commitment from the budget of the Ministry of Finance. So it is good to say you need to think about the next 3 years, what happens next with this kind of work. And that's why I was telling you, we reached out to the Uganda Law Reform Commission, who have particular money for legal reforms. But remember, they cover the whole of government, not just Ministry of Health. So you have to lobby to interest them in what you're doing. So somehow the outbreaks might help us. Tell them, if you can't support us here, there's an outbreak of yellow fever. We need to work on this. But that is also not sustainable. So it's just a sad reality that we have work that was started, but now it has to stop, or it has to stall. Yes.
Yeah. We also had a question from Brooke. And I see more fingers, another one, yes.
Thank you so much, Martha. This was really interesting presentation and a way of looking at the world that is new to me. So thank you for that background. And I'm curious, because I'm always thinking about impact and public health impact, what do you think the major potential public health impact of delaying reforms because of these cuts, what that would look like?
So, for example, what I said at the beginning of my presentation, before COVID-19, our minister thought that she could wake up and close down the borders, close down schools and close down places of worship without any consequence because she's saving lives. After COVID-19, she now knows she has to consult laws. So the impact of having this kind of cuts means that you carry out an outbreak response without involving a single law. And it happens sometimes because sometimes we have to respond very fast. We had an outbreak of Ebola in some 2 districts out of the capital, and they first caused a community quarantine, and they thought about the laws afterwards. You see that? But then again, if you do that, lawyers are alert now. After COVID-19, lawyers are alert. They know their rights. They take you to court, and that affects an outbreak response completely. Because now people will get out and begin moving around, and then the spread escalates. So right now in Uganda, the legal fraternity is more aware about their rights after COVID-19. So when you have this kind of thing stopping, it means things go the way they want. Then for the fact of the animal health, we have responsibilities as a country to comply with the responsibilities, with the requirements of WOA. When you have such work starting and it stops, it means we fail to comply. Because when they come to our country to inspect our compliance, they look at the laws first. The law we have is for 1918. It was only reviewed in 1964 to change the issues to do with funding. So actually the amendment of the Animal Disease Act would cause a lot of a good score for Uganda in terms of the WOA requirements.
So it's also a barrier to other kinds of investments, etc., because it's part of also the resilience of the country in the way that it's viewed, or how reliable such investments would be. And is it also the case that no, I'm going to leave it for now. Hold on. I just wanted to. Sorry, you first. You had a question first. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. I am going to ask about the negotiations in Geneva, but in theory, from a legal perspective, in theory, can having a bilateral agreement with the US on pathogen access be compatible with having a multilateral agreement at WHO, or does one rule out the other? Sorry.
Oh, that's a very hard question. And this is on YouTube, right?
No.
Can we talk afterwards, please? Yes, thank you.
So maybe I can still ask my question then. Is it, in your estimation, also important internally for trust of public health responses that such new laws are being created? Is this something that comes into sort of the effectiveness of your response? Just kind of trying to follow up on what Brooke was saying. Is that people does it matter for building trust with the citizens around public health responses when there is an infectious disease outbreak, that there are these laws and guidelines that kind of structure the government's response, or does it not really matter? Or, yeah.
Well, it does. I can give an example. I'm a lawyer, so I only have one publication on how we responded to COVID-19, but if you read that publication, when we responded to COVID-19, before the president could actually announce any health measure, he made sure he had the law in his hands. Yes. Yeah. He had the law in his hands. And why I know he did it because most times the lawyers would approach him. Why are you closing down the schools? Why are you closing down places of worship? I have the law in my, so it builds trust. It's accountable. Yeah. And there's a lot of consultations that goes into making laws. A lot of back and forth. If you follow the process that led to the amendment of the Public Health Act, for example, there was a huge debate in Uganda about vaccination mandate. Very huge. Actually, that particular part of the act was greatly changed by the parliamentarians. Yeah, so there's a lot of consultations, building trust, buying that goes into the legal reform process. Yeah. Maybe that's why it's such a long process. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, but it's kind of interesting to hear how that's being approached as well. I think that even kijken. Do we still have time? Yeah, niet zo heel veel. Nog één vraag. Even kijken. Who is holding? It's always hard. Oh yes, you. Yes.
I'm Najma from Faculty of Public Health, Sriwijaya University, Indonesia, currently a research fellow in Leiden University. So my research is on HIV, women, and Muslim community. I'm just wondering, like in Indonesia, we also depend on Global Fund for HIV prevention and treatments, and how to persuade local government to put the funding for medicine, particularly because of the stigma is still strong, like when we discuss with public policy, what for we help for the not good people, because the HIV contextual is not good people, not good Muslim, not good family. So although we have like good law they provide at local level, but it's still difficult to persuade them to put a proportional funding for HIV program based on your experience.
This is more about you as I think this question goes to you as a policymaker. How would you approach this if you would be making more like a political, you're asking for a political strategy on how to deal with this, right? Yeah.
That is to work with the local governments, how to persuade them to work with you. I think there's something I used to do in another law I was working on, which was covering mostly the local governments. You have to get a particular person. We used to call them champions. You can't approach the local government as they are, but you need to get a particular person in the government who you can assume to be very influential in local government and start with that person. You take one, because if it's just local government you're dealing with, begin one person at a time, rather than calling them into a room and talking to them. So we do that at home. We get champions in a particular ministry, introduce the subject to them, and then start from there. It's this champion who's going to sell your idea to others, and then it moves like that. I don't know whether that is clear.
That's super clear. Thank you very much. Okay, one more question? Yeah, one. Okay, the chair says one more question. I have a question over there, but yeah. Oh, no, I had a question over there, sorry.
Whose question was it?
Yes. No, but you had a question, right? Yeah. Oh, sorry, then you go. Sorry, I thought you were...
If really nobody else wants to.
No, no. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a very different question. So you said something about making new laws, but also that is already a hard job. But enforcing them is even harder. And especially if there are cutbacks, you can see an increasing discrepancy between what is the right of people and how much money there is. And it may seem far away, but we have the discussion in the Netherlands also currently, but also if you look at the Long-Term Care Act, for example, if everybody would execute the maximum of what is their right, the Netherlands would be bankrupt. So my question is there ever been an example of a collaboration, not only with the Ministry of Health, but also with the Ministry of Finance, before making new legislation?
So, of course, I didn't have time to go take you through how we make our laws in our country. That was not really part of the presentation. But before a law is taken to Parliament, there's what you're supposed to prepare. It's called a certificate of financial implications. That means the Ministry of Finance has to say that you have to defend this reform, this new law, that you can actually afford to implement it. And you have to work with the Ministry of Finance because they're the ones who handle the budget. And if you finally collaborate and agree that you can afford to implement this law, they give you a certificate. And that's the first document you present in Parliament before you can present your law. So there's a whole process in my country. That's why I say it's a long process. It's so consultative. Nearly every ministry is involved. But the hiccup, like I said, is the enforcement is really weak, despite all that work that goes into it. So there's a collaboration with the Ministry of Finance, with the ministry responsible for gender, all these issues are usually done through the process. Yes, I don't know that answers the question.
And as we say also in a lot of legal research, the Ministry of Health is the weakest link in government. So, and the Ministry of Finance is the strongest link in government. So, thank you. So I would like to close this discussion. I think talking about law and governance and politics in health and also in global health also makes us very aware that sometimes health researchers are like, well, we're right? I mean, this needs to change. If we just do this thing, then we'll be more healthy. But once it comes to policy and lawmaking, it needs to negotiate with all kinds of other interests that we have as well. And then that's where it becomes really hard. And then I think it's important to bring that into these discussions, because I think if we're more aware of that, then we can also find maybe more, how do we say, hooks to maybe connect some of these issues and find synergies, like what you're doing. I think a little bit what I heard you talking about with the animal law, animal health law, etc. That if you can connect it to agricultural goals, or like be a handy politician and lawmaker, then that can be very useful also for the kinds of things that we find very important. So I would like to close it now, but I hope this discussion gave you a lot for over the break. And then we'll come back here in about 15 minutes. Yes. All right. See you later. Thanks. Thanks, Marta. Yes. So nice. Yeah. Yes. Is everybody back? And also ready to keep going? There's a little surprise in the program, which is always good because then it wakes you up. And that is that we have Maryam Bakker from the Christian Eijkman Award. And she's here to introduce the award and also the person that received it. So please applause for Maryam Bakker.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm here on behalf of the Eijkman Medal Foundation. And we're pleased to announce the medal of this year, the winner. And well, we have a bit of a video where the chair will introduce actually the winner, so it's not myself. But yeah, we're very happy to have another extremely good scientist selected, extraordinary in global health. And after 3 years, we're going to announce the winner of the 2025 medal. That will be very clear from the video.
My name is Teun Bousma, and as chair of the Eijkman Medal Committee, it is my pleasure to announce the winner of the 2025 Christian Eijkman Medal. Christian Eijkman was a Dutch Nobel Prize winner who made truly outstanding contributions to global health and our understanding of vitamins. With his work, he saved countless lives. And to honor his legacy, we award the Eijkman Medal once every 2 years. And we award this medal to candidates with links to Dutch universities or Dutch scientists who made, like Eijkman, outstanding contributions to global health. And we do that with a committee of experts across the Netherlands. So the criteria we judge the candidates on are threefold. The candidates have to be outstanding scientists who have an active research agenda, so they should be mid-career researchers. They should already have made an impact on science. They should have an excellent international track record, and they should also have made an impact on either society or on academia. So, for instance, by improving health or healthcare, or by truly improving our understanding of a disease that poses an important global health burden. So on top of these two criteria, we also ask for from our candidates that they are team players, that they are already investing in mentoring the next generation of researchers. So it is quite a list of criteria. And this year we have selected a winner who truly fulfills all these three criteria. And the winner is Dr. Tadesse. Dr. Tadesse leads an international research team in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and he's also affiliated to Radboud University Medical Center in Nijmegen. His work is of excellent scientific quality, and his work has also already contributed to health policy. So 2 examples of this impact are that he uncovered the role of an invasive mosquito in bringing malaria to cities in Africa. And he not only described this scientifically, but he also developed an actionable plan to try and reduce the burden of malaria that this mosquito poses, and perhaps eliminate the mosquito from certain urban settings. A second example is that his work uncovered the importance of parasites that escape diagnosis by rapid diagnostic tests in the Horn of Africa. And again, he has done outstanding research, but he also helped in changing the policy for malaria diagnosis in Ethiopia. And on top of that, he is also an outstanding mentor. Only 5 years after his own PhD, he is already leading a team of over 70 Ethiopian researchers. He built the infrastructure, he's mentoring the talent, and he has been able to generate an Africa-owned research institute where top quality research is being done by Ethiopian researchers with international collaborations, but all the ideas, the creativity, the hard work, and also all the intellectual input is truly owned by Ethiopian researchers. So with that, he is truly an example, and we are very happy that he is willing to accept the Eijkman Medal 2025.
So thank you very much for the recognition, and this is going to create an important opportunity to create a momentum in my career, to boost my activities on investigating the contribution of the converging malaria biological threats in the Horn of Africa, and appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much for considering.
An excellent winner of 2025, but we are already looking ahead to 2026, where we hope to award yet another Eijkman Medal. And this time we hope to award it to a female researcher who fulfills the same criteria that Dr. Tadesse fulfilled. So if you know of an excellent candidate in your network, or you think you may be a very good candidate, please nominate for the Eijkman Medal 2026.
Yeah, so I think once more, maybe congratulations to Professor Tadesse. I think, he's a true winner. And please look out for the next call, and look out for outstanding female scientists in global health. And please nominate them, or nominate yourself as a female global health scientist. Please scan the QR code, and you can do it up till the end of January.
Thank you very much. It's so nice you're doing this, highlighting the importance of sort of mid-level people, because that's where the push usually comes from. I would now like to invite, hold on, because I'm first going to introduce you. Rogier Sanders to talk to us. Rogier is a professor of virology at the Amsterdam Medical Center, is an affiliate faculty at Weill Cornell Medicine in New York. And his research focuses on structure-based vaccine design, particularly stabilized HIV. If I'm not saying it good, then do correct me. Envelope trimer vaccines that have advanced into clinical trials. Thank you very much for that work. You've published immensely, 250 scientific papers, received a number of major grants, but probably you cannot do all this work with your heart in the right place, because you care about this, and we would very much like to hear from you about what are the challenges for the future of global health. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that nice introduction. And I want to start with a disclaimer. I'm a molecular biologist, and although Constance told me not to put too many biochemical assays and protein structures in my presentation, I have a few, but I hope to be able to walk you through them anyway, and convey some of the passion for the science behind it. So, of course, in this audience, I don't need to explain why we need an HIV vaccine, in particular in low and middle countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And of course, you're all aware about these global trends in HIV infections, but also the threats that were so well pointed out by Brooke about the number of new infections. And I just want to point this out because I think a vaccine could actually mitigate at least some of these issues, because at an individual level, when you have durable protection, you don't need PrEP or anything. You're not dependent on someone in the White House that cuts off these medicines. It's been extremely difficult, the quest for an HIV vaccine. And this slide shows you all the efficacy trials, so phase 2B, phase 3 trials that have been performed with candidate HIV vaccines. And as you can see, the results of most of them was really no effect whatsoever. And in fact, some of them were halted because of potential enhanced infection in the vaccine group compared to the placebo group. There was one trial with possibly a modest effect, but it was borderline statistically significant and actually somewhat controversial. So one thing that these vaccines have in common is they don't induce neutralizing antibodies. So what are neutralizing antibodies? Those are antibodies, proteins in your blood that can neutralize, directly inhibit the virus. None of those vaccines induced those types of antibodies, while we know that they're usually the correlate of protection for most viral diseases. So this is complicated because HIV is extremely diverse. This is a phylogenetic tree, and if you're not a geneticist, just let me explain to you that the diversity of HIV in one particular country or even in one particular individual is higher than that of global influenza or also, for example, global SARS-CoV-2. And if you consider that we need to update our flu and COVID vaccines regularly to deal with diversity, you can understand what the problem is that we're facing with HIV. And so the goal is then to induce broadly neutralizing antibodies. With broad, we mean that the antibodies need to be able to deal with this diversity and cover all this breadth in virus diversity. There is good news, and that's that the human immune system can make these kind of antibodies. This is a virus particle. It has these envelope proteins on the outside of the virus. Those are the critical antigenic determinants for generating antibodies. And this is a bunch, shows a number of antibodies, broadly neutralizing antibodies, isolated from people with HIV. So we know from people with HIV that the human immune system can generate those antibodies. But how to do that with vaccination is, of course, the question. And I'm not going through this in a lot of detail, but the first 15 years of my career, I set out to take this envelope protein, which is a multi-subunit complex that is very unstable, falls apart, and I stabilized it. And we published first on this in 2002, but it was actually, it required 10 more years to supplement this work. And that led to indeed a stable mimic of the envelope protein as it is present on the virus. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but those envelope proteins, we solved atomic level structures of those with collaborators. That taught us an enormous amount of how this envelope protein on the outside of the virus actually functions as a molecular machine to get the genetic material of the virus into the target cell. And that's going to be important for some of the next slides as well. But I'm a molecular biologist, so sometimes we have existentialistic questions. What is the impact of my research? In particular with HIV vaccine research, right? For 15 years, by now 25 years, I've worked on this, and we don't have a vaccine yet. So why am I actually doing this? So there's that question, what impact does my research have? But one other question that was actually influenced by Joep Lange quite a bit, and I will come back to that, is will my research ever get out of the lab and into the clinic, into humans? This first question actually was sort of satisfied in very unexpected way, I must say. So we're working on viruses, and since the COVID pandemic, you can find these nice pictures of viruses on the internet. And what they have in common is these proteins on the outside, the spike protein or envelope protein. The spike protein that we all know about now from COVID is essentially the envelope protein of SARS-CoV-2. And there's many commonalities between these proteins. Spike, envelope, it's the same thing. And as I mentioned, these proteins serve to get the genetic material of the virus into a target cell. So here's the genetic material. What needs to happen is that the membrane on the surface of the target cell needs to fuse with the membrane of the virus, and then the genetic material gets in. And in order to do so, so this membrane fusion has to occur, and in particular, this bit of the protein indicated here in orange need to go through various changes in shape in order to get those two membranes together. Very complicated conformational changes. And that can be achieved because this form of the protein is spring-loaded, like a mouse trap. And with the right trigger, and for HIV, this is CD4 binding and co-receptor binding, it shuts, and the virus gets into the cell. However, this is a spring-loaded state, and what happens is that actually the mousetrap spontaneously transverts to this state. And that's really relevant for vaccines, because antibodies that recognize this post-fusion state, this particular state, are unable to neutralize the virus, while antibodies to this state are able to neutralize. And it differs per virus how important this is. For RSV, this is extremely important. In the 1960s, kids were vaccinated with a vaccine. 2 kids died in the vaccine trials because they were vaccinated with this form of the protein. They induced non-neutralizing antibodies that, in fact, enhanced infection when they encountered the virus. So recently, new RSV vaccines have been approved that are now based on a stable form of this form. So for HIV, we think this is also really important. And this is a lot of biochemistry, but these orange bits that I just talked about, they're helices. So the protein assumes this helical state. If we introduce one amino acid in there called proline, you can prevent that helix from forming. And we showed for HIV that actually resulted in stabilization of this state. The proline is exactly located here. It prevents this long helix from forming. but that turned to be a universal mutation, and we didn't know that at the time at all. We thought we had done something for HIV. But it was then applied by Hans Langendijk, working at J&J in Leiden, to RSV. But then, importantly, in 2017, Jason McLellan and Andrew Ward applied it to SARS and MERS spike proteins. And that configuration, and in effect they put in 2 proteins, not 1, that was copy-pasted in January 2020 for COVID and included in most of the vaccines that we received. So just to point that out, if you get an mRNA vaccine, you get a piece of genetic material that's injected in the muscle. The muscle cells now start to generate spike proteins, but not wild-type spike proteins, but proline-stabilized spike proteins, in order to induce neutralizing antibodies. And this is Tony Fauci in April 2021, explaining to the public why we got so quickly 2 COVID vaccines. There were several reasons, the mRNA technology, of course, but he also cited our work in the HIV field as a contributing factor there. So what impacts does my research have? Well, it was actually quite unexpected, but it turned out to be useful for COVID vaccines almost 20 years after the original discovery. But then the second question, will my own research ever get into humans? And that brings me to Joep Lange. So I knew Joep for a very long time, but I was the lab rat, nerdy molecular biologist. He, of course, was the big clinician advocating for ART as Coca-Cola to be distributed in Africa. But we met at meetings and we talked also about my research. And the question he always asked was, when do you have an HIV candidate that we can start testing in humans? And my answer was always, well, we're still trying to improve things in the lab, and the preclinical data is not fantastic yet. But that changed in 2015 with this paper where we showed that this proline-stabilized envelope protein was now able to induce neutralizing antibodies. At this point, we started thinking about testing these proteins in humans. But this was, of course, 2015, and by then, Joep had passed away. So I needed to look for other partners, and probably Peter actually helped me out and hooked me up with Godelieve de Bree. And that turned out to be a fantastic relation. And Godelieve has sort of, in this sense, replaced Joep as the partner for us to move to clinical trials. And so we've now done 3 clinical trials at Amsterdam UMC with experimental HIV vaccines, all phase 1 studies. And so this is the first publication of the first of those trials, and it's in Press in Nature Communications. And you may recognize the name of the first author, Reis. It's Peter's daughter. This is her. And she did an unbelievably fantastic task of setting up phase 1 vaccine trials at Amsterdam UMC. No one had any experience with this. We had to connect all the different departments, internal medicine, of course, but also nephrology, experimental immunology, intervention radiology, and she coordinated that all. And on top of that, she needed to get the trials through the COVID pandemic as well, where, during lockdowns, we were not allowed to enroll anymore, but we tried to keep the trial going for the participants that were already enrolled. And there are some very interesting results as well. And one major finding is that in the trial, the female participants had really substantially stronger neutralizing antibody responses to male recipients. And this is not completely new. It has been seen for other vaccines. but usually it's a 1.5, 2-fold difference. But this is, after 2 immunizations, it's a 22-fold difference. We think we can attribute this to the adjuvant, because if we take the baseline cells from these participants and we treat them with the vaccine in vitro or ex vivo, actually we see that the female cells are a lot more reactive to the adjuvant. And this is, of course, important moving forward, especially considering that in Africa the burden of young females is a lot higher actually than in men, and maybe we should not throw away some vaccines because they don't work very well in the overall population, but they might work very well in females. And this effect is through a particular receptor on immune cells, toll-like receptors, number 4. But some of those toll-like receptors, such as 7, very important for vaccine adjuvants, is actually located on the X chromosome. For those, that may be even more important to look at this carefully. So we also did 2 other trials. Those were multi-center trials. They were also done in New York and Washington. The results of one of the other trials was published over the summer in Science, very complicated study. But, and just to show you the first 2 authors, Tom Carneil's postdoc in my lab and Madhu Prabhakaran at the VRC in Washington. And by the way, she was fired the week this paper came out because of random budget cuts at the NIH during the Trump administration. But she did a fantastic job, actually, in the analysis of this trial. And so this is the schema of the trial. Recipients received either the protein or a placebo. There was no serious adverse events. But I won't go through all the details, but I want to show you one protein structure. And that's because this vaccine, for the first time ever, induced antibodies with what we call atomic precision. So on top here, you see the envelope protein. In gray here, you see an antibody in this spaghetti structure. You see an antibody called VRC01. This is a broadly neutralizing antibody. 2 minutes, broadly neutralizing antibody induced or elicited in people with HIV. And that's the type of antibody we tried to induce. And in green and in orange here, you see antibodies from the trial participants. And you can see how the spaghetti overlays almost identically. And that has not been shown for any vaccine before. In the interest of time, I will skip a little bit. But so, what are the next steps then? Well, one is, of course, to test the vaccine on the African continent. And so we hooked up with the brilliant consortium in South Africa to get this tested with a better adjuvant, actually, in South Africa. In South Africa, Uganda, and Kenya. But the catch here, of course, this was funded, or going to be funded by US aid. And this tweet is by now famous. I think we spent the weekend feeding USAID into the wood chipper. So that trial was halted. And actually, I don't know whether any of you at the time read this article in Science by the scientific writers from Science about this US aid freeze. So there's some text here. The collective impact is tectonic. That's an understatement, says Glenda Gray. She leads the brilliant consortium, which at the last minute shelved plans for phase 1 clinical trial with new HIV vaccine candidates. That was our trial. Also, not only that, there was a lot of capacity building and training in this USAID program as well. And we had, in 2024, we had 2 very talented scientists from Uganda over for 3 months at our lab to teach them about HIV immunogen design. They're back now, but they don't have the support anymore to continue working on it. So yeah, US aid funding cuts are extremely are devastating for some of this work. But also NIH funding is very insecure right now, and our group or groups together with Marit van Gils, we've been cut out of funded NIH grants over the last year because the program officers said the grant is not going to get funded if you have a foreign site component. And in fact, 4 million of grant funding for our research is still in limbo because of the shutdown, because of uncertainties of the 2026 NIH budget, and because we still don't know whether, as a foreign partner, we can actually receive the funds. What about EU funding? Well, we recently co-authored this piece in PLOS Global Public Health. That's not great either. This is EU or funding from EU member states over the last 15 years or so. It's also declining very rapidly. So is it all bad? Well, not entirely. The Gates Foundation is still very much committed to the quest for an HIV vaccine. The Gates Foundation has actually taken over the phase 1 clinical trial in South Africa that I was just mentioning in a very small form, in a much smaller form. And actually the components in Uganda and Kenya were not funded by the Gates Foundation. So it's only South Africa at the moment. And I will skip through the rest. But we're also planning now a second trial with the partners in South Africa using mRNA forms of these immunogens, actually. And I will leave it there just to show that these clinical trials have been done with an enormous number of people in the US, in the Netherlands, and elsewhere. And as I said, we're very much looking forward to continue this work, despite the funding issues with the partners in Africa.
Well, thank you so much, Rogier. Do you also want to take a microphone here? Also, the organizational power is unbelievable. If I look at all of these people, all of these organizations, I'm like super impressed. I was wondering maybe 2 scenarios. So what would have been your timeline for realizing an actual on-the-ground vaccine had it not been for the lack of funding right now? And how much lag do you feel like, how much longer do we have to wait? I mean, I'm sure you've thought about this a little bit secretly. Maybe you don't want to, but anyway, yeah.
I'm always very hesitant with timelines about an HIV vaccine, and there's this famous Bill Clinton 1996 words that there would be an HIV vaccine in 10 years. That didn't materialize, so I don't want to make any predictions in terms of the delay. I mean, the trial in Africa that we were talking about, that I was talking about, is delayed by at least a year. So, of course, the results from the trial are delayed by at least a year. And it's also actually smaller in size, and the lessons we're learning are therefore reduced as well. So the overall impact is going to be more than a year delay, probably.
So only a year delay.
Yes, well, for that particular study.
Yeah.
But collectively...
No, but I mean, getting it on the ground. Have you ever dreamt about in 10 years it'll be manufactured and ready?
Yeah. So yesterday we had our annual project review meeting with the Gates Foundation. They were in Amsterdam yesterday to look at our program and I showed you the slide, and it's been all over the news, that Bill Gates, that the Gates Foundation basically gonna shut down in 20 years. But up in those 20 years, they're going to spend 200 billion. But for any HIV vaccine to have impact in 20 years, that vaccine needs to be ready in 10 years. And that means that the preclinical research needs to be ready in 5 years, and then...
Then the 1 year seems to matter a lot, right?
Exactly.
Yes, yes. And so imagine it's there, and we're talking in this symposium also about how, all these different layers, right? So this is the technology and the innovation. What would be the barriers or the kinds of things that you see behind there in terms of getting it on the ground, the socio-economic context, the legal context that we've heard about? What would the rest of us need to do to make sure that this has a really soft, smooth landing?
Yeah, so I didn't talk about that a lot, but it's unlikely that an HIV vaccine is going to be as simple as a normal vaccine with 3 shots or 2 shots or 3 shots of the same thing. It's highly likely that it would be a sequential vaccination with different vaccines. And that is a logistical nightmare, of course, in terms of implementation. There could be technological solutions to that, where you inject a vaccine, but it releases at different times. But there could also be other ways to deal with this. For example, implementing an HIV vaccine in the childhood vaccination program, because then you actually have quite a number of moments. That you are injecting vaccines anyway.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Like, wouldn't this be a childhood vaccine that you...
Yeah, and if you then give a final boost around 12 or 14 years of age, or maybe simultaneously with the HPV vaccines, then adolescent women could be protected.
Yeah. So maybe some questions also from the room. Yes, over there and over there. We're going to start over here and then we move there.
I would like to add a third question to your list of questions. Is it not going to be too late to be cost effective still, if it still takes time to get a vaccine, and it to be cost effective? You were talking about LEN, so there's a 6-month injection now. That they're busy with a year one. There's going to be the dual prevention pill. If that, well, it's funding constraints, but if that is really taking off, it means there will be less virus circulating. So how does it impact on the cost effectiveness of a vaccine? And also saying, you said for LEN, like the funding is an issue, but Gavi, which does a lot of the childhood vaccinations, is heavily impacted. Childhood vaccines levels are going down. So will it? I hope, if I see all the work that has gone into, I hope, but that's also an essential question. I think, will we be on time to even make it cost effective to implement?
Yeah, so I'm not a health economics person, but many people, and including at the Gates Foundation, have considered this, and they still think a vaccine is actually necessary, and we're not going to treat our way out of this epidemic, even not with long-acting PrEP. And that's, of course, also aside from the choices to give people, right? PrEP may not be desirable for everyone, while a vaccine may be more attractive to some of those people.
I'm going to do one more question, and then I want to move to the next speaker. But I do want to say that in the meantime, you can think of more questions also for Rogier, because we're all coming back here all together later on. Yeah. So for now, Frank. Yes.
Thanks, Rogier. Great presentation. I have a question that may first in this audience here be cursing a church, and second, you may not want to answer it at all. But given the fact that for HIV, compared to other diseases, right, like malaria, tuberculosis, there's dual markets, right? So there is there is a market, there is a demand in high-income countries for the vaccine in addition to in low-income countries. So I'm surprised then that industry is not stepping up to this, because now apparently you have to do this to the Gates Foundation. They have the Gates MRI, but that's it. So I'm actually surprised that for a vaccine that is not for a poverty disease, you have to go this route. So can you comment on that?
Yeah, I can't speak for a big pharma, of course, but they have been involved in the past in HIV vaccines, and they failed. Merck failed, J&J failed. So I think they think the risk is just too big. That's too much investment and too much uncertainty.
Can you repeat the question for the online audience real quick?
Yes, mighty reluctance of industry also have to do with what happened with the first malaria vaccine, the RTSS, that basically was turned down by WHO because they said, well, it's great, GSK, that you've come up with this vaccine, but we actually don't need your kind of vaccine. That's basically what happened. And they asked for a whole bunch of additional phase 3, phase 4 studies.
Yeah, that may very well be. So maybe it's interesting in this context to mention efforts from WHO, but also many other organizations to actually try to set up vaccine production facilities in low and middle income countries, including Africa, so that they are not dependent on a US or a Europe-based company to actually make it. They could then make it themselves. And for example, the University of Pennsylvania has waived mRNA-related licensing or patent rights for low and middle income countries to facilitate this.
Okay, so thank you very much. Let's give him an applause, right? Thank you. And we'll meet you back here later, Rogier. And for now, I was wondering, are you guys cold a little bit? Shall we ask them to lower the airco a little bit? Does anybody have fingers on the buttons of the airco? Up there? Yes, thank you very much. Okay, and then for me, it is time to introduce our next and last speaker. So, our last speaker is Maryam Shahmanesh, is a physician scientist, global research professor at University College London, and director of implementation science at Africa Health Research Institute in South Africa. Where are you?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear you. Yes. Oh, okay. You're not. There you are. Hi. Yes.
Hi. I'm in South Africa. Sorry, I'm not with you.
No, that's okay. But your research, I just want to tell the people here that your research focuses on designing and evaluating biosocial interventions for adolescents and young adults, including decentralized HIV prevention and peer navigator-led models. And you will explain to us what all of that means. Yeah. I want to give you the floor, and then later we'll have some back and forth questions also from people here. And then I hope you can also join the panel afterwards. Thank you very much. Let's give her
Okay, thank you. Now I can share. And hopefully you can see my screen and hear me. Can you do both?
Yes.
Brilliant. So I'll just get straight into it. So reflections on implementation research amongst adolescents in rural South Africa, really back to the future. And I think you've heard quite a lot about the concerns we have around the cuts in funding that we're sort of foregrounding to this presentation. So this is just to remind ourselves that, we continue to have large numbers of new infections, And this is despite having effective biomedical tools to prevent HIV transmission and acquisition. So we have the simple point-of-care HIV test, which is a lateral flow test, a bit like what you might know from COVID, what you might know from pregnancy tests, which are cheap and available. If people are living with HIV and they start treatment, they become undetectable. They cannot transmit the HIV, so U equals U. And therefore, we also have HIV pre-exposure prophylaxis on top of other things like condoms and other tools, HIV pre-exposure prophylaxis, which if taken, reduces acquisition of HIV. And now we've got, of course, and you just heard about it a bit earlier, we've got long-acting HIV pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is even more effective. And so we do have lots of tools, but these tools have not really translated into population effect. And a lot of my work is around how do we translate an innovative intervention, whether it's a vaccine or a treatment, into population effect.
Just a small check. Are you showing us slides right now?
I am. Are you not?
We're not seeing them.
Yeah, it tells me that I am sharing.
Yeah.
Shall I stop sharing and share again?
Yeah, maybe try.
But it might be the screen because you're seeing my face and not my slides. Let me try sharing again like this. Can you see it now?
Technical team, can you please move the slides back into... Yeah, thank you.
All right, there we are. Yes, we're back.
Okay. So that was a slide that you missed, but that's fine. We'll move on. The area that I work in, as you can see, is this dot. It's 2.5 hours away from Durban in KwaZulu-Natal, which is itself one of the highest burden areas of the world for HIV. And the area that I work in is very rural and poor with, as I said, a very high HIV burden. Prevalence is about 40 to 50% in antenatal clinics, and also very high youth unemployment. And what we have seen here, we're a health and demographic surveillance site, and so we've been tracking HIV incidents over the years. And you can see men and female incidents, and what you can see is the red lines are sort of 2011, 2015, brown is 2016 to 2019, and blue is 20 to 23. And we saw some very dramatic reductions in HIV incidence, which was really driven by the extremely successful antiretroviral therapy program in South Africa, where the majority of the 8 million people living with HIV are on treatment, and voluntary male medical circumcision. However, and clearly some impact of PrEP and other interventions amongst adolescent girls and young women. However, we still aren't really reaching that sort of incidence declines that would eliminate HIV, which really needs to drop well under 1%. And you can see incidences particularly in women aged 20 to 34, but also in men aged 25 to 34, are still well over 2.5%, 3%. And so this will continue to drive the epidemic. And so we still need to go that extra mile over and above treatment to really get this epidemic under control. And then this was all happening despite really well-funded programs. And with January 2025, we suddenly have this drastic reductions in funding for HIV prevention in particular. South Africa's pretty good at maintaining its treatment programs because it buys its own treatment, but prevention, and particularly prevention amongst key populations, was predominantly funded by external donors, and this was overnight lost. And as you can see, people are very clever, and they sort of repurpose the USAID sort of interventions into hat selling projects or other projects, but that means we had a massive decline in funding. And so what we really do with our implementation research is we want to really show how we can rapidly introduce evidence-based interventions, including new products. But I think also thinking about some of our old approaches, now that funding is much less, to have population impact. Because in order to have population impact, we really need to scale up the prevention. As I just showed you, treatment alone will not get us out of this epidemic. So one of the key issues that we've been facing is answering that question: why do we still have a problem despite such good treatment programs? And what we find is, we're not really reaching key populations at the highest risk of HIV acquisition soon enough with treatment and also with prevention. So here we can see at a population level in 2021, although we have very good treatment coverage in older people in this rural setting, half of the young people living with HIV had a detectable viral load. So young people are probably not getting onto treatment soon enough to prevent transmission dynamics. And also, are we reaching those who need it most in terms of prevention? And we know that 14% of adolescent girls and young women in our setting are involved in transactional sex or sex work because of the high levels of poverty and lack of job opportunities. And they have 3 times higher HIV incidence. Their incidence is 8% compared to less than 1% in the other adolescent girls and young women. And yet we also know that key population interventions such as sex worker interventions aren't necessarily reaching this group of vulnerable young women because they aren't self-identifying as sex workers. And this, in terms of going back to the future, reminds me of a work that I did many years ago in Burma, where what we did find, it was very difficult to reach key populations. They were extremely stigmatized, extremely illegal, but we set up some of the first sexual health clinics in the jade mine area where the epidemic was concentrated. And those sexual health clinics, Tazin is a name of a flower, a white flower, they really reached the highest risk women, sex workers and others that were high risk, but also men who were very high risk because it was a sexual health clinic. And so maybe sexual health is a way of reaching sexually active young people with services. And indeed, we did the first randomized controlled trial, which showed sexually transmitted infection testing and sexual health increases demand for HIV prevention by 60%. And we did that by randomly allocating young people from the health and demographic surveillance and offering them STI testing, and found that they were much more likely to link to services and start HIV treatment and prevention. However, our process evaluation found that the peer support didn't work as much as we expected. This is partly because of the COVID lockdown, and so the peer supporters were only able to really engage with young people using the virtual methods, and they weren't able to engage with young people using direct face-to-face. But also what they found is that young people had very high levels of social need, and they felt that just sort of focusing on HIV was not what young people wanted. They wanted them to help them manage some of the psychosocial issues that they had, and the peers didn't feel equipped to support that. So we iterate, and we remember again, going back to the future, in the past, when we looked at work in India, looking at sex worker interventions in India, one of the key things that we found was where you had collectivized sex workers who had increased access to social entitlements. They also had reduced experience of violence and reduced STIs, and therefore collectivizing, creating solidarity and a sense of community amongst sex workers was very effective in reducing their risk of HIV. And similarly, that model could be transferred to young people living in rural communities. And so we adapted our intervention to incorporate the integrated HIV and sexual health component, which we found was very effective, but to add in a peer support component, which was much more holistic. So young peer navigators aged 15 to 30 are selected from their communities by community leaders and or municipal leaders as young people that are very active and very able and very engaged. We then provide them with training and support with peer supervisors and part-time income as a stipend, which is equivalent to a community caregiver. And they live and work in the communities. And what they do in their communities is map what's available in their communities for young people. They develop youth groups and safe spaces for young people. They then meet each young person in their community, and they have a one-to-one discussion with that young person, understand what their needs might be. Is it social? Is it psychological? Is it health? If the need is high, they will escalate it immediately to a review panel of a nurse and a social worker electronically and get advice. If the need is medium, they send them to the clinics, mobile clinics that come to the area every month so that they can receive STI testing, HIV testing, antiretroviral therapy, choice of oral injectable PrEP, and or any other services they need. And if they need social support, they provide them in the community. And this is all integrated using an electronic management tool that allows the peer in the community to communicate their action plans with their peer supervisors, with the nurse and social worker in the review panel, but also to the clinics that the young people are going to attend when they attend. As you can see, this person-centered care can be quite holistic. It will be referrals for health needs, it can be referrals for social needs, referrals for educational needs. Do people want information on bursaries, vocational skills, writing CVs, and sometimes even legal needs? For example, they might need a protection order against a family member that's being violent to them. They haven't had their child support paid. So there are a variety of needs that these peer navigators support in the communities in a holistic way. But does this work? This is obviously a kind of intervention that the government would have to fund. And so we're doing a step-wedge cluster randomized controlled trial to try and understand whether this package of a peer navigator referring young people into these mobile sexual health clinics will have a population impact. That is, reducing the proportion of young people with an undetectable HIV viral load, because if you don't acquire HIV, you'll have an undetectable HIV viral load, so that's incidence going down. But if you do acquire HIV and you get onto treatment, you'll also have an undetectable HIV viral load. So that captures both prevention and treatment in the same measure.
Maryam, just a quick check on time. You only have a couple minutes left.
Okay. What is the impact on the uptake of PrEP, persistent on PrEP and HIV incidence? What we've found that the peers reach the majority of adolescents with tailored care. Of all the young people in the community, they've met 3/4 of all of them, and nearly half of those are young men, and half of those that are mobilized by peers into mobile sexual health services needed treatment. So they're really reaching a very high-risk group of young people. We also see that PrEP uptake was much higher in those at high risk compared to low risk, 5 times higher. And overall, they're also finding young people that haven't yet started HIV treatment and starting them onto treatment. They also cover an unmet sexual health need in the clinics. But that may not be enough. As we've just noticed, is that people were always complaining a pill a day to prevent a pill a day. So in the second phase of the trial, we re-randomized the clusters so that they receive injectable PrEP as well as oral PrEP as a choice. And here we see that once you offer a choice, oral uptake, which was 60% before choice, goes up to over 90% when we offer choice. And 60% of people will opt for the injectable as an option, but 30% still like the oral option. So that remains a useful option in the mix once you provide choice. Similarly, we have very high levels of sexually transmitted infections in these communities, and STI was significantly associated with taking up cabotegravir, the injectable, and associated with retention on PrEP. And so again, suggesting a much higher risk group of young people is starting and continuing on PrEP when we offer a choice. And obviously, we've just heard about lenacapavir, that is on the horizon, and these models of care can really help us deliver lenacapavir to scale to these young people, particularly as the price is going to come down with generics in 6 months to a year. So what I would say that we can gain efficiencies by integrating HIV/SRH and social care, and therefore maybe overcome some of the barriers of cost cutting that's happening right now. We know that digital tools and supported self-care can help us task shift to peers with lived experience, again, decentralizing care and reducing some of the costs through that. We know that peers with lived experience, sexual health, and choice of venue and product are proven ways to reach key populations at highest risk of HIV acquisition. And if we do reach those populations, modelling suggests we'll have the greatest impact with these newer, longer-acting PrEPs. And so there are lessons from the past, lessons we currently have, where we can potentially still roll out HIV prevention, even in the context of reduced funding that we're seeing right now. And just to say, to thank the multiple funders that allowed this work to be done and my team, which did the work in the community. And I'll stop sharing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Maryam. And it's such a good perspective also to have after the talk of Rogier just now, because you're really bringing these you're creating actual systems to bring some of these interventions on the ground. My own question was, it seems like the peer system really relies on, or it's the system really relies on these peers within the community. I was wondering, are these usually women or men?
Because we're not only targeting young women, the services are sexual health services for young men and young women. And so what we did was purposefully ask for both young men and young women to be referred in. So what we did in each cluster in each area was ask for 2 young men and 2 young women to be recommended by the municipal and local authorities. We then did some training and then some assessments and selected 2 of those. The aim had been to have 1 man and 1 woman in each setting. In practice, many of the men failed the assessment, so we've ended up with more young women as peers than young men, but we do have a substantial, so about 1/3 of the peers are young men. And those that did pass the assessment are extremely good. And we do find that more than 50% of the young people they meet in the communities are young men, and almost 50% of those that come to the clinics are young men. So we do reach young men with this model, as long as the intervention is sort of sexual health broadly for both young men and women.
And how do you talk to these people about what's going on in terms of budget cuts and things like that? Do you have those conversations, and what does that look like on the ground?
I think there was a lot of anxiety early on when the budget cuts came, because obviously it was very well covered in the sort of media. In terms of this rural community, it probably hasn't impacted as much because most of the HIV treatment was still within clinics. It was much more impactful in urban settings where key population interventions closed overnight, and that was much less visible. But they have been quite anxious, and there has been a sort of knock-on effect in terms of the general availability of funding. And so they are aware that, for example, the peer support would have likely, the aim had been that we show it's effective and our trial will report in about 6 months' time, and then the government would take it over. And currently that's unlikely because of the funding cuts. And so we've been very lucky, and it looks like we do have funding to continue with a project to deliver LEN in the same model, a little bit less highfalutin, much less kind of clinical input, more peer support. So, but yeah, there was anxiety, and there is anxiety about what happens in 3 or 4 more years, even if we do continue for a few more years.
Yes, I can imagine. Are there any questions also from people in the room? Yes, in the back.
Hi, Maryam. It's Anniek. I'm originally from South Africa, and I was thinking your mention of bursaries and the area of KwaZulu-Natal. About 3 or 4 years ago, there was a municipality that offered bursaries for women who stayed virgins throughout their studies. So how do you navigate working with the authorities who may have very conservative values? It's also the homestay of former President Zuma, who famously took a shower to prevent HIV infection. So how do you ensure accurate and information reaches them in the context of conservative values?
Yeah, I think that's always been a challenge. I think one of the problems in terms of broadly, HIV has been broadly globally, I think, is the sort of very strict taboos and issues around sexuality and discussing sexuality. I think one of the interesting things with having the peers is they're very embedded in the communities, and because they're working beyond just HIV and sexual health, well, firstly, sexual health was something that came from the communities. They were very worried about fertility, so they're very keen on the sexual health component of the intervention. The HIV component becomes more powerful with the peers developing a sort of responsibilities in the community, being known in the community, many of them being invited onto the war rooms to sort of represent young people's views, and that's allowed them to navigate some of the challenges. But the biggest challenge to PrEP has been barriers from families and from community who are concerned about sexuality. So actually one of the next interventions, one of my early career fellows who's a social scientist, she's particularly keen on developing interventions which target families themselves and communities and really start to work around some of these taboos. I mean, the reality is that prevalence is very high, and so people do know that that HIV exists, and some of the kind of virginity stuff was a little bit as a sort of fear of, it's a kind of response to fear, remembering that many of these families are grandparent-led. They saw their children die in the 90s, and they're very scared for their grandchildren who are now coming into adolescence. And so some of it's helping the young people navigate their grandparents, and the grandparents navigate the reality that PrEP is a way to keep people well, it's a way to keep people fertile, it's a way to keep people alive. So these are challenging issues, but I think they're not insurmountable. And the sort of way in which peers have been sort of accepted, I think, shows that. But it's a sort of long-term thing. It's not a short-term quick fix. You need to invest in these peers, let them live in the communities and really work. I think that we find that very strongly from our social science team, that the more embedded they are, the better they are at their ability to navigate. And it's not something you can just sort of do quickly.
All right. I would like to first ask if we can please lower the air conditioning. For some reason, it doesn't seem like it changed. Do you have the same feeling? You can really like lower maybe to 25%, or maybe shut it for a little bit and then turn it on very softly again. And also, I would like to, Maryam, thank you very much. First, maybe give her another applause. But also stay with us, please. And do you want to come and sit on the couch? Rogier also joins us on the couch. Brooke joins us on the couch. We have a couch. Are you comfortable as well, Maryam, over there?
I'm very comfortable, yeah.
Okay, you don't have an air conditioning problem, I hope?
No, definitely no air conditioning problem.
Good.
And have excitedly been we're negotiating a Unitate grant to deliver LEN, and so I'm in a very happy mood that we may actually have long-acting injectable, at least for some people. Yeah.
Good. So for me, I think we got a little bit of a lay of the land right now, and it's not unproblematic, if I may say so. This is my takeaway so far, and I've already seen some sort of suggestions of ways to look into the future and to also see that there's a time after this time where things might become possible again. But maybe we should use this time that we have together at the end of today to think about this. And maybe first, I would like to ask you, Brooke, because you're there. What does the world look like after Trump? Because it's going to end at some point, right? How do you think about that? No, yeah, well, you're there. So give us a little bit of a hopeful perspective on the future, maybe. Can you try? No, but seriously, or just a realistic view into the future.
Realistic.
Yeah.
I'm concerned that Trump stays president longer than any of us hope. So in terms of the future, like it can't be an American-led response. I mean, it can't be American-funded, solely American-funded. And I think we will see that from the financing perspective that will start to shift where funding comes from. It's freezing. My nose is cold.
Yeah, still. Sorry, don't want to complain too much.
But so I think we can't look to America anymore. So I think the response will have to look different. And I hope that we've learned the vulnerabilities of health systems by siloing programs, by these vertical programs, and really start to invest in any donor support to go through the government. So governments have control over their own programs. And I hope that that's sort of what this ends up looking like at the beginning or end of all of this. And theoretically, Trump won't be president forever, but I think we should stop looking to America for leadership on this.
And maybe from your perspective, also a lawyer often thinks about power. Is this an opportunity in terms of shifting the role of the U.S., the power of the U.S. in this field, and sort of demanding that other countries, regions, stand up, and maybe it is also an opportunity in terms of sharing the power more in this field, or at least redistributing to some extent. What is your view on this? You're in these international negotiations. What does it look like?
Well, maybe from the point of view of Uganda, for us, would want to see government taking the role back in terms of the legal reforms. But from the point of view of Geneva, I think it's time for other governments to take the lead. And as a negotiator for Uganda, when the US pulled out, there's a kind of a fear that the negotiations will end, but they didn't. They didn't end. Other countries had to take their stand and finish up the negotiations. And when we see the US coming back, and it's the way it's coming back right now in Africa, we think they also know how relevant these negotiations are, even if they're trying to do it at the back. Yes, so we are happy that they didn't stop, we finished them up, and it shows that even without America, we can, as the world, we know what's important, and we move to finish up the negotiations in Geneva. Yes, thank you.
But it is shifting then the power relations as they were before. I mean, obviously it is. But you were also talking a little bit about the role of the EU in this regard. You're not. Can I ask you about this? Do you want to say something about this?
No, because I know the Netherlands is part of the EU, and I don't have very good comments to say there. So I'm
yes. Okay. Rogier, you've heard what Maryam was talking about. Can you reflect a little bit about what you've heard and how you see maybe in the future your vaccine panning out in these kinds of contexts? I mean, this must be part of your vision for the future.
Yeah, so the question that was asked about, would a vaccine be competitive compared to long-acting PrEP is, of course, a very relevant one. What I would like to hear is whether communities would actually welcome a vaccine in addition to long-acting PrEPs, and I think they would. On the other hand, there's also obviously in the Netherlands, but everywhere, vaccine hesitancy that we need to deal with as well. But we obviously would have to work through these kind of health centers to get the vaccines distributed.
Okay. Maryam, can you reflect a little bit on this? Say that there would be a vaccine available in the context that you know so well. How would you approach this? How would you get it on the ground? What would be your program that you would devise for such a vaccine?
I mean, I'll talk about TB because we're doing that with TB, a vaccine that's more imminent. And I think one of the key things which has been really good with the TB vaccine trial now is that even before the vaccine trial shows effect on lack of effect, likely effect from what everybody thinks, already there's sort of a coalition, a sort of implementation science coalition in South Africa, bringing together sort of DOH, policy, budget and finance, community, healthcare workers, really looking at how it would roll out. Because obviously all the vaccines that we roll out, which have been very effective, are childhood vaccines. And so in the case of TB, it's going to be an adolescent vaccine, and that's a very different model of delivery. We've got HPV, it worked very well in schools, but this is likely to be a slightly older age group. So really thinking about what the delivery models would look like, engaging community even before the vaccine comes out so they're ready for it and expecting it and wanting it, I think is pretty important. And I think, the HIV vaccine is not quite there yet over the years, but when a vaccine is in a phase 3 trial, which has had good phase 2 results and is likely to roll out, it's worth starting those conversations, thinking about who is going to be targeted first, how the early, also there's always, like with Len, there's a similar thing, it wasn't enough at the beginning because it's too expensive. So who are you going to target? Who's going to receive it first? But that very much must be done through ministries of health. And I do think it's been terrible what happened in terms of the sudden cutting of PEPFAR funding. I think that was, immoral and unethical, but I think it has made us all think a little bit more about ownership, state ownership, government ownership. What's the Department of Health? Who's the Ministries of Health's responsibility for these diseases? And so I think that there are some positives that will come out in the longer term, but I think in the short term, the way it was done is catastrophic. And my other worry is I don't think it is just the US. We always say as if Trump goes, will it change? I think the global funding world has shifted in a way that it'll be very difficult to shift back. The UK also cut funding. Yep. The EU is also cutting funding, and it's sort of made it acceptable to not care about global health right now. And I think it'll take time to bring it back. So I think we do need to think very differently, both from a research perspective, where global health research funding has dramatically declined and global health delivery has dramatically declined. So I think, we do need to be quite nimble in how we respond. But an HIV vaccine will be very welcome. I know that from communities.
Yeah. Okay, I want to open up the discussion a little bit broader. Yes, Tobias. Okay, Lea comes in.
Thanks, everybody, for excellent presentations. I had the pleasure to be the one running this Heineken program with Joep. And in those early days, vertical treatments were the only way forward. We had to go fast, and there was no way to horizontalize, to look at the primary healthcare setting. However, I just would like you to be aware that already in 2004, so that's 3 years after we started with those workplace programs, we got involved in Namibia in a so-called risk equalization fund for HIV. So what we did is we with PharmAccess, we involved the 3 different health insurers in Namibia to include HIV in their health insurance package and have that covered by an independent international fund, in this case the Postcode Loterij, to pay for HIV. And under those conditions, the health insurers in Namibia were very much willing to develop very affordable health insurances, including HIV, 2004. We got, within half a year time, 38,000 people from the formal sector insured there. That was 15% of the total workforce of Namibia, paying premiums themselves. They're talking about sustainable funding. Then PEPFAR came in and killed the whole program within 3 months' time because PEPFAR provided HIV care for free. So you compete out the entire private sector, and that was it. So what I'm saying here is we have health insurance programs starting up in Africa all over the place. They're big in Rwanda, in Ghana, everywhere. If we would channel and create the same risk equalization funds again for HIV, by using those health insurance programs, then we integrate our vertical HIV money into a horizontal primary health insurance situation. Just like we did, by the way, 20 years ago in Namibia already, right? So, I mean, this could be, and I'm curious also for legal and also, Brooke, for your economic view on this. Since health insurance is developing all over Africa, isn't this the way forward? And shouldn't we advise the Global Fund to stop doing the programs on their own and just channel their funds through those health insurers?
Wonderful, wonderful idea. Do you want to say something about this? What is the discussion around health insurance in Uganda right now?
Unfortunately, in Uganda, it's still struggling. About 3 years now, trying to have the national health insurance bill passed through Parliament. So not successful, but I like the idea that it's good to use that approach for HIV. So I need to talk more about it with my colleagues. Yes, I think it seems, yeah, I think it's a nice idea.
And also, I think there are many historical, going back to the future, where funds were created, like we have all kinds of risk sharing in the private sector, or even within and between people that have a little bit to put in, right? So yes, Brooke, do you want to?
Sweet. I mean, that would be great. I think that insurance schemes will reach, I think it's how it's implemented and to which populations can access it. But I mean, there's a lot of private healthcare that happens all across Africa. And it's making sure that those schemes and those, the payments for them are reasonable and accessible to as many people as possible. But that was fascinating to hear that USAID killed something that was so successful, and it's also not surprising, but yeah, it's a great idea.
And I think if you look at just one disease, maybe it might not be worth it, but maybe you would have to broaden it, just from my perspective. I mean, we have similar discussions right now in the European Union, like are there elements of our current health system that maybe we collectivize at European level so that it's cheaper, basically? Yeah. Maryam, do you have a perspective on this?
I mean, South Africa has been talking about a national insurance system. So South Africa has free at the point of delivery healthcare through primary care, so the access to services is good. But they have been talking about a national insurance system because it would allow people to navigate between the private and public sector. It will happen, but it's been a long and difficult discussion because it's also the private sector worry a lot about what they lose. I think they're as much, as you can see in the US, often as much barrier to it, these sorts of things, because they lose funding. The big issue is, I think, that the significant dramatic cut in PEPFAR funding has meant that many innovations that could have happened slowly can't happen slowly, and so people are now scrambling just to cover what's needed, if you see what I mean. So I think in some ways we're in a bit of a sort of 1 year to six months to 1 year where people or governments are just having to manage the fallout from dramatic declines and picking up, particularly the HIV treatment. It's 8 million people, it's a lot. So I think it'll take time for people to do innovations again because they won't have the space.
Thanks. We have another question and another question. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Tusa. I am a PhD candidate at AIGHD and University of Amsterdam. So thank you for the discussion. And I really like to, I was pleased to hear how Marianne reflected on the rollout of already the vaccine that is being produced right now, but also the accessibility, the discussion around accessibility, how it looks like on the ground. But out of curiosity, I'd like to hear from you, Sanders. Since the vaccine is tested or tried in Africa, how does the partnership with African scientists look like in this project? And another one, also once this vaccine is approved, how the availability, accessibility, and affordability of this vaccine looks like in Africa? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and thanks for asking that. So the trials that we're now planning with partners in Africa are really driven by the African scientists, and it's in the past, when trials were done in Africa, all the samples would then go to the US or the EU and tested there. All the analyses are gonna be done in Africa as well. And where possible, we'll help them out, but there's extremely talented HIV researchers on the continent, so they will do it themselves. And the Gates Foundation is really supporting this, in fact. So we'll be there on the side, but it will really be driven by the African scientists. And in terms of access afterwards, if it's successful, again, this program is mostly funded by the Gates Foundation. When you get a grant from the Gates Foundation, the institute signs a global access clause, so that a vaccine is accessible at a reasonable price in Africa. And actually, the Amsterdam UMC Technology Transfer Office tells me all the time that's exactly the policy of Amsterdam UMC as well. So I assume that something similar will happen with what I just said about the University of Pennsylvania waiving their patent rights for mRNA vaccines. We would probably most probably waive any patent rights for the vaccine in low and middle income countries.
Yes, fantastic. I just wanted to give one more person, and then I want to go to close.
Thank you. I'm Henry. I'm based at the AIGHD office in Kampala. I just have something that cuts across. I want to first thank Tobias. I think you've helped to open up, I think, this current situation. You might think that we've hit the wall, but clearly I think there are potential workable solutions. And then I want to take it back to all the panelists. Especially when you think about the 90s, I think there was, Professor Reyes might remember, I think there was a positive scare, a positive panic that included everyone, including the politicians. And I'm just wondering, Martha and others, whether you've seen this same panic. I think the panic then with the politicians drove to look for development partners who can fund. But with the breakdown, the current breakdown in the global funding situation, I don't know whether you have sensed any panic in the politicians, because they are the ones that mess it up, and whether it is driving them into a positive direction, this time not looking for other partners, because what I'm worried about, I'm hearing shifting. And I think what we need to be worried about is not to shift and create the same scenario that once it busts, then we go back to zero. And I'm just wondering whether you've sensed that politicians are now thinking of something, engaging more the national, local governments, engaging more the national private sector groups in the countries. Thank you.
So are we never waste a good crisis, as they say? Are we using this crisis right now to build local capacity, build local innovation power, etc.? Maybe I can ask you this, because you do you see any light at the horizon that this is going to do something for your voice in the world, but also the ability to be a voice in the region, or to build local capacity? How do you look at this? Do you see any of this potential? Because you were very intrigued by the proposal that was just made by Tobias.
Well, the proposal which has just been made by Tobias is, for me, it's interesting. But you see, in Uganda, I think this is already included in the proposed National Health Insurance Bill, HIV. But in terms of what Henry has just asked, the panic, I've only seen it shifting powers to other, not going back into government. And unfortunately, I can only speak for Uganda, because right now we are into political campaigns, so I don't see the interest being focused so much on health right now, probably for political speeches. I saw a lot of panic towards making proposals for the pandemic fund. So already it's just shifting to not into government, but outside again. Yeah, so I don't think I have good news from what I've heard in the health sector in terms of government becoming more reliant right now. But probably in the next years, as a new government comes in sworn in, probably, because I don't see a change happening anytime soon. I don't see the US coming back the way it was before. So ideally, we would want government, of course, take back this responsibility, and they really can. It's just a matter of realigning these priorities. But from Uganda's point of view, with what's happening right now with the campaigns, I'm not very sure about that. Yes.
Maybe also the others. Can you imagine a future where you think back and was like, oh, that was a very hard time, but because of that, we're now where we are right now? Yes, but maybe here, maybe each one of you can reflect a little bit on that, and then we close. Yes.
Well, so I think before January this year, there was already a movement of trying to make low and middle income countries more independent. And in fact, the US aid program that was cut, that I talked about, the 45 million HIV vaccine project, was also intended to exactly do that. The first clinical trials that were on the program were with available products, i.e., including those of us. But at the same time, we were training African scientists to develop their own HIV vaccines, and at the end of the program, test those to become completely independent of the global north. And I think the Gates Foundation has that philosophy as well, and will try to continue that kind of approach.
Yeah. Maybe Maryam?
So I'll answer this in two ways. So I think on the more worrying front, I think isn't just the reduction in funding, which itself is a problem, but the more worrying is a sort of real attack on science and the intellectual freedom and thinking that's come driven from the Trump administration and reverberating through their billionaires and throughout the world in terms of raising the right. And I think that is a fundamental and very challenging problem, particularly if we get innovations such as vaccines, but really driving science. So that, I think, is something that we need to be aware of, and I think we can tackle it by creating solidarity on the ground against it. And similarly, I think on the cuts, The positives, I think, are in pushing the response, thinking more about integration of services, thinking more about how we think about the holistic impact of some of our interventions, not just the siloed impact. And so I think that will come out. The worry is it happens so quickly that it's quite difficult for people to really do that transition slowly. I think that research funding what minimal amounts of research funding that exists will predominantly be South focus, which I think is really good. I think Gates have moved in that direction. Wellcome has moved in that direction. Two of the most recent calls have all been African partners only leading. So I think that is a very good thing. But I do worry that we don't lose the solidarity and really thinking about the broader impact, the importance of all of us as connected people across the world. There's not separate, something that happens in Africa will impact us in Europe versus back again. I think really thinking about that and how we bring that solidarity in the future, that's where I feel positive. But right now, it's not good, but it will get better.
Brooke?
Something that the panic question, I mean, to see sort of the panic around the cut of funding, more like the chaos around it, the funding's off, the funding's on, we have to be quiet, we can't say anything because it's going to risk our funding. That's what's been very disturbing to me, that like people aren't willing to speak up and say what's happening because they hope that their funding are going to get turned back on. Ugh. And throughout this whole process, the quieting of voices that really need to be amplified right now has been terrifying, I think. And so I hope that as we come through this, we start to speak up more, speak out more, talk about what's happening, and I hope that becomes more normal so we can get back on this path. Because there are opportunities like HIV with that sort of the siloed programs and the vertical programs. Some of the stuff that was getting funded at the margins, sort of from a health economics perspective, like we started to get fewer and fewer gains from the additional money we're putting in. But if we think about systems as a whole instead now, so if we're funding this differently, if we have insurance schemes, we have government-funded programs, we can start to rethink about how we fund. So instead of those sort of low-margin activities, perhaps putting that into other areas of a healthcare system where we can get much greater gains, so in diabetes or hypertension or whatever it might be. So I hope that it's a moment for that to start to happen.
Very nice. Thank you very much. I see a new research program emerging around health insurance, Constance. I'm just putting that out there. I also want to invite you to close us for today. Not before I thank everyone here for all your contributions, everybody in the audience as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anniek. And it's very nice that you talk about health insurance, because it's not coincidence that Toyos mentioned that. And actually, Back to the Future is health insurance, of course, because of the health insurance fund program that we have been working on and working with PharmAccess on. So, yeah, Back to the Future. So thank you very much. I would like to thank you all. Is Maryam gone? Yeah. Are you still there, Maryam?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, good. No, we can't see you anymore. I can see. Oh, it's not there. Yeah, no, it's only here. Okay, good. Good, you're still here. I would like to thank you. And because you are not here with us and I can't give you the gift, we will send it to you. I first would like to thank you very much for joining us online. It's worked out very well, even for the discussion, which is fantastic. This is the new standard, people. We will always have one or two persons online, because that's how it goes. And of course, I would like to thank you all for joining. And this is, I think these are the niche meetings. It's small, fine, and deep discussions that we can go in depth. I really, really appreciate how we have been discussing the state of the world, so to speak. Let me thank you with this and help you. And Leah's going to help me like she has done the whole day. Thank you very much for this. Thank you very much for joining. A big applause for all. Thanks for the team very much. And last but not least, a big thank you to the organizers, Leah and Anim and Libby and everybody else who has helped with that. We're going for drinks, right? Please. Sorry? A bottle?
So there's drinks and snacks. If you go out, they're upstairs. You know, I don't know if you saw those wooden stairs. Yeah, like a Dutch borrel. Yeah. Borrel.